Good morning. Good to have you with us on this Monday. I'm Joe Fryer.
And I'm Savannah Sellers. Thank you for joining us. We're going to get started this morning with that looming deadline for former President Donald Trump.
His legal team has until 5 o'clock today to respond to the prosecution's request for a protective order. Prosecutors want to bar the former president from publicly disclosing some of the evidence gathered in this case. Over the weekend, Trump's team filed a motion to move that deadline to Thursday, saying they needed more time to discuss. U.S. District Court Judge Tanya Chutkan denied that request. This comes as the former president ramps up his rhetoric, both online and on the campaign trail, trying to discredit the trial. Trump released a flurry of social media posts aimed at Judge Chutkan, his former Vice President Mike Pence, and the Biden administration. He also attacked special counsel Jack Smith in public comments on Saturday during a Republican dinner in South Carolina, calling Smith deranged. He has denied any wrongdoing in the case and continues to downplay the charges against him. We have NBC News legal analyst Danny Savallo standing by this morning. Let's start, though, with NBC News correspondent Vaughn Hilliard with the latest details. Vaughn, good morning. That protective order requested by the prosecution, what are the Justice Department's biggest concerns here, and how is Trump's legal team responding to today's deadline?
Right. This was a similar protective order that the special counsel's office was able to place on Donald Trump in the classified documents case. The prosecutor's argument is that Donald Trump should not be able to disseminate or publicly talk about evidence that is presented to his attorneys through this discovery process ahead of the trial here. And the DOJ, in their filing on Friday, wrote, quote, such a restriction is particularly important in this case because the defendant has previously issued public statements on social media regarding witnesses, judges, attorneys, and others associated with legal matters pending against him. I mean, just one of the social media posts from last week from Trump was, quote, if you go after me, I'm coming after you. The prosecutors have suggested that Trump's revealing of any potential information could have a harmful chilling effect on witnesses or adversely affect the justice system as it plays out over these months ahead.
So, Vaughn, I mean, despite concerns about the former president's activity on social media, Trump was posting about his former VP, Mike Pence, over the weekend. In a True Social post, Trump said that Pence, quote, has gone to the dark side. Now, keep in mind, the defense has said Pence could be a star witness for Trump during this trial. How is Pence responding to all this, and how central is he becoming in this case?
Right. This is a perfect example to what the Department of Justice in its filing on Friday suggested could amount to potential witness tampering here. He's calling Mike Pence delusional. Mike Pence very well could take the stand in the trial. He testified before the grand jury as part of the special counsel's investigation. And if a judge were to see this as being a pressure campaign on a potential witness, that is where Donald Trump, if this protective order were to be implemented, could face potentially additional legal challenges. I want to let you hear from Mike Pence yesterday directly respond to Donald Trump's attacks against him. Take a listen.
You know, I testified before the grand jury under a subpoena after we got clarification from the court about protections that I have under the Constitution as the president of the Senate. But I have no plans to testify. But look, we'll always comply with the law.
Mike Pence had said that he did not believe that Donald Trump should be indicted in this matter here, but at the same time, he is running for president against his former boss, and you saw Donald Trump's comments laid out in the indictment last week, suggesting that Mike Pence was, quote, too honest. Mike Pence's presidential campaign right now has T-shirts online for sale with the words, quote, too honest on them. Joe.
So Trump, let's talk about him, also took to social media to request that the Judge Chutkan, recuse herself from the case, claiming that he would not be able to get a fair trial in Washington. Has his legal team suggested they would actually file a motion to have this done, and have the judge's past rulings indicated that she might actually recuse herself or change locations at all?
There's no reason to believe at this time that the judge would recuse herself, or that a motion to change the venue would ultimately be granted. Donald Trump has made these suggestions in the past, and it has not been ruled in his favor. Yesterday, his top attorney in this case, he did come forward and say that they intended to potentially file a motion to have this change of venue, and his suggestion for a place to move this trial would be West Virginia, because he cited it as more diverse. Of course, their concern here is that a D.C. jury pool is potentially much more anti-Trump. Of course, on the flip side of this, in 2020, West Virginia, Donald Trump won by a 2-to-1 margin. So, of course, if this were to go before a judge, there would be much to consider. Joe.
All right. Vaughn Hilliard kicking us off this hour. Vaughn, thanks so much. Now, Trump's attorney, John Lauro, over the weekend defended his client, saying Trump's efforts to try and overturn the election were merely aspirational. He's also defending that now infamous call that Trump made to Georgia Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger, asking him to find votes in the 2020 election.
Raffensperger said Trump was threatening him, but Lauro maintains Trump did nothing wrong. Here's Meet the Press moderator Chuck Todd now with more on that interview.
Well, hello, Joe and Savannah. This week on Meet the Press, it was Trump attorney John Lauro who joined me to discuss Donald Trump's threats to Georgia Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger, among the other things he's accused of. Of course, in that phone call, he told him to find votes after Trump lost the state in 2020. Here's the reaction.
What he was asking for is for Raffensperger to get to the truth. He believed that there were in excess of 10,000 votes that were counted illegally. And what he was asking for is the Secretary of State to act appropriately and find these votes that were counted illegally. That was an hold on one second. That was an aspirational ask. He's entitled to petition even state government. But that doesn't involve an obstruction of federal government. But what the Biden administration has said is somehow President Trump obstructed a federal proceeding. That relates to what was going on in the states. And President Trump had every right to ask the Secretary of State, I believe that this election was conducted improperly. There are deficiencies here. I want to see if there are more than 10,000 votes or whatever the number was that were counted illegally. Once again, that's core political speech.
Bringing up a criminal violation is somehow speech. I mean, it's the way it sounds like somebody saying that's a mighty fine, it's a mighty fine restaurant you have there. It'd be a shame if something happened to it. I mean, it's no different than, I mean, it's a vague threat here to bring up a criminal offense.
Have you read the First Amendment? Oh, no, Chuck, have you read the First Amendment? I mean, political speech is the most protected speech that we have under our Constitution.
You can see the entire interview and more at meetthepress.com. You can also get more Meet the Press right here on NBC News Now every single weekday at 4 p.m.
All right, Chuck Todd, thank you so much. Let's bring in NBC News legal analyst Danny Savalos now and pick up right there. Hey, Danny, good morning. So John Lauro had made the rounds on all the Sunday talk shows laying out his defense of the former president. I do want to talk about something he just said there in his conversation with Chuck that we played, saying that his request to find the 10,000 votes in Georgia was, quote, aspirational. Now, Lauro also used that phrase when describing Trump's statements to Pence about halting the certification of votes on January 6th. Walk us through what you have gleaned here. This tells us about their legal strategy based on these few comments so far.
I think it's long been the defense's position, even before there was an indictment, that the find me 11,000 vote statement was defensible. I've frankly never understood why there's been so much focus on that when, as Chuck Todd very expertly pointed out, in the very next sentence, Donald Trump does say something to the effect that Raffensperger and his attorney may be violating federal, I believe, criminal law. And that's not just someone like you or I saying that, Savannah. That is the president of the United States, the head of the executive branch, which contains the DOJ. And so I've long had a problem with everybody focusing on this find me 11,000 votes when I think far more damaging is the potential threat. And you see Lauro there struggle with that somewhat because he just says he dismisses that as protected by the First Amendment. I do agree there's an argument to be made that find me 11,000 votes. It could be a demand. It could be a threat. It could also be aspirational. But far more damaging to Trump is the next sentence. And I think the indictment also represents that, even though the find me 11,000 votes is certainly flashier for whatever reason, threatening someone with federal crimes when you are the head of the federal government and the DOJ, that to me is far more ominous.
Danny, I also want to ask you about something else that's making headlines from this conversation, something that Lauro said while discussing the former president's alleged pressure campaign to get Mike Pence to reverse the election. Let's listen to that, and I'll ask you on the other side.
He said the president asked him to violate the Constitution, which is another way of saying he asked him to break the law.
He never said. No, that's wrong. That's wrong. A technical violation of the Constitution is not a violation of criminal law. That's just plain wrong. And to say that is contrary to decades of legal statutes.
Danny, explain that. A technical violation of the Constitution is not a violation of criminal law. Is that true? Explain that to us.
that statement isolated is true. I mean, the Constitution contains, it's not a criminal code. It actually contains a crime like treason. It defines that crime, but otherwise, it is not a criminal code. It does not impose penalties for most of its violations. A good example is when the police violate your Fourth Amendment search and seizure rights, that evidence may be excluded as part of the exclusionary rule, but it's not a crime. We don't arrest police for a bad search of a car. So that statement by itself is technically correct, that a violation of the Constitution is not a crime. There are a lot of violations of laws that are not crimes, but there are violations of criminal codes that are indeed crimes. So, look, it is a technically correct statement, but that's not what anything in the indictment alleges. The indictment doesn't allege constitutional criminal code violations because really, with the exception, very few exceptions, that doesn't exist. It alleges criminal code violations under the U.S. Code.
And Danny, quickly, before I let you go, let's talk about this protective order, this 5 p.m. deadline that Trump's team is facing. As we mentioned earlier over the weekend, Trump did post on social media going after Pence, also the judge, and then special counsel Jack Smith calling him deranged, as we've heard before. Do these statements go against the magistrate's warning to Trump at his arraignment last week?
Yes, the magistrate, interestingly enough, warned Trump, but that magistrate will never be seen in the case again because of the way federal procedure works. It's really the district court judge that's going to enter this protective order. And look, there's been a lot of talk about this protective order. The bottom line is this. If the parties don't agree, and there's no way they're going to agree, they're just not going to do it, then the judge is just going to enter a protective order. And Trump is not helping himself over the weekend by already lashing out because it gives something concrete to the district judge to say, this is no longer theoretical. This defendant is already misbehaving on social media. So now I should err on the side of caution and make this protective order stricter. Not a gag order, but a protective order to make sure that he doesn't disseminate discovery.
Danny Savalos, thank you so much.
Breaking news this morning out of Pennsylvania, where at least 3 people are dead following a charter bus crash. State police say the crash happened shortly before midnight on Interstate 81 between Hershey and Harrisburg. As many as 50 people were on the bus when it crashed into a passenger vehicle, then flipped on its side. Police say several passengers were taken to Hershey Medical Center for injuries ranging from minor to critical. The names of those who were killed have not yet been released. Authorities are still working to notify their families, and the cause of the crash remains under investigation this morning.
And now to Alaska, where a declaration of emergency has been issued for the city of Juneau after historic glacial flooding over the weekend. At least 2 homes were swept away and several others were damaged after water levels eroded riverbanks. Well, luckily, no one was injured. The National Weather Service says while floodwaters are receding, more erosion could occur as riverbanks are still unstable from the record-breaking flooding.
Well, from storms in the east to record-breaking temps in the south, millions of Americans are waking up to severe weather threats this morning.
Meteorologist Michelle Grossman joins us now with your Morning News Now weather. Hey, Michelle, good morning.
Hey there, guys. Great to see you. Yeah, we're busy once again. We're starting out with that dangerous heat across the south, and we're looking at the chance for severe storms as we go throughout this afternoon and evening hours. We have a first batch of rain moving through portions of the northeast, the Ohio Valley, early this morning. Then we'll get a little bit of a break, and then later on this afternoon, once we get the sun going, we're going to see some strong to severe storms that could have some really gusty winds. Even a few tornadoes are possible, and we're concerned about the chance for flash flooding. So radar showing us that we see the first part of this storm. This is a warm front that's lifting through, and then we'll see the cold front coming through later on today. You could see it here on Futurecast, that blue line. That's a cold front. That's going to go through some really warm, humid air, and that's going to bring the chance for some strong to severe storms. Again, torrential rainfall is a possibility. We could see up to 4 inches in some spots, and we could see 2 inches per hour. So the concern there is for some flash flooding. And then tomorrow we'll see it move off to the east. Storms lingering across the New England area. We could see the renewed chance for some flash flooding as we go throughout Tuesday. So as Monday looks, we're looking at lots of people affected by severe weather. 87 million people impacted from the northeast into the mid-Atlantic, portions of the Tennessee Valley, the southeast, even into the south central states, with winds gusting over 65 miles per hour. Especially where you see that orange shading. So major cities along I-95, D.C., Philadelphia, down through parts of the mid-Atlantic could see some really strong storms. Flash flooding, again, could see 2 inches per hour, especially where you see that darker blue color. So Burlington, Syracuse, New York City, D.C. could see some really heavy rainfall. And we're expecting even up to 4 inches of rain in some spots. This is through Tuesday. So we'll see that storm system lingering over New England. That's where we're going to see the highest amounts in parts of the interior parts of New England and also also the Northeast. Now, as far as the heat goes, dangerous heat, 70 million people impacted from Southern California into the south central states, the Gulf Coast, the Southeast, into the Carolinas. Where you see the pink guys, that's your excessive heat warnings. We're looking at triple digits once again. Records will fall, and we're going to feel like over 115 in some spots. Back to you.
The humidity felt like about 150% this morning when I woke up and left. So
pouring rain.
It's
Yeah.
gross. Yeah.
All right, Michelle, thanks so much.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.